Tēnā tātou, ka tiko ai tēnei e noho nei, ko Te Aopare Dewes tōku ingoa, no Ngāti Porou, Ngāti Whakaue, Ngāti Rangitihi ahau, he hoaranga pū ki te kamupene o Chapman Tripp. Kia ora everyone, my name is Te Aopare. I am a partner at Chapman Tripp. I whakapapa to Ngāti Porou, Ngāti Rangitihi and Ngāti Whakaue. What is tikanga? That is a hard question to answer actually. From a Te Ao Māori perspective, I guess it's framed in, haha te mea tika. What is the tika way of going about a communal way of living and interacting with one another as people, but also interacting with the environment in which you live. But it has been defined, and so for example, Tai Hakure jury said tikanga is the set of values, principles, practices and norms from which a person or community determine what is the correct action in Te Ao Māori. From a legal perspective, tikanga has now been accepted by the courts as part of the New Zealand common law. There are many different ways that doing what is tika can be exercised depending on the context. And then when we get into this idea of climate change, from a Te Ao Māori and a tikanga perspective, what becomes relevant there is the duty and responsibility of all Māori people have in terms of kaitiakitanga. So we look to the Waitangi Tribunal Y262 report, because that has a lot of discussion about kaitiakitanga. How do we best use these resources in order that our community will thrive? That's quite a different proposition, I think, from my understanding, which might say you should never use the land and it should be left in a pristine way. But if that's going to have a detrimental impact on that Māori community because they're unable to use their land to generate jobs or income or whatever is needed to sustain that community, then that's not actually exercising that role of kaitiaki in that more holistic way. There will be people who may argue that as a result of the hugely detrimental impact of things we're doing as humans and the acceleration of climate change, that we must, stop all those things immediately. My understanding of a Te Ao Māori kaitiakitanga lens is that it was a bit more pragmatic than that and a bit more nuanced, and it was, yes, we need to acknowledge that detrimental impact, but we also need to acknowledge what's stopping those activities, what detrimental impact will that have on our communities, particularly communities who are already in a low socioeconomic state. Legal personhood was granted in relation to the Wanganui River and also in relation to Te Urewera, and then most recently in relation to Taranaki. There's a voice as well that's speaking from the perspective of the Whanganui River, or from the perspective of Te Urewera. And so by having a voice, it means that that voice is therefore taken into account. Overall, the change and the development of legal personhood, coupled with the advancement through the courts of the recognition of tikanga as a body of our common law, will mean that the status of all of these environmental bodies of water or ngahere or maunga, the status of those increases. The principles of Te Tiriti o Waitangi has been very much framed in a partnership, and our challenge is that that's not actually what Te Tiriti o Waitangi says, and that it actually meant tino rangatiratanga or self-determination, which is not partnership. Those Māori groups or the heads of those Māori groups are making decisions because they know what's going to have the greatest impact in the most efficient way. In New Zealand, management of whenua and resources, there has been a maturing of Aotearoa in terms of the recognition of the importance of the environment and the perspective of tangata whenua, how the use of a resource, land or water, will impact on either that land or on the communities in and around that area. Our expectation is that will continue, that momentum will continue. So, at the moment we have ideas of, Te Taiao and its mana and its Māori and lots of different mātauranga Māori and Te Ao Māori concepts in the legislation. Even if those things happen to be repealed in the future, the way that the courts are developing, we expect that those things will still be relevant considerations. If a decision maker is deciding on whether or not to grant a use right for that resource, our expectation is that the perspective of tangata whenua from a Te Ao Māori, tikanga Māori context will be relevant to that decision maker's decision. So in terms of tips for particularly our Māori landowners, it's information sharing and it's drawing on those groups. If those PSG groups have an environmental arm already that's been thinking about this, sort of being proactive about getting those groups to share that information, because inevitably those Māori landowners who whakapapa to the land block will also be beneficiaries of the PSGE. Te Tiriti o Waitangi is accepted as a foundation document of Aotearoa. Tikanga Māori is accepted as part of New Zealand's common law. Those things alone, even if the legislation is silent, we expect there will be a pretty strong position for tangata whenua to argue that they are relevant considerations when somebody is making a decision, whether it's a council or whoever it might be.